They had a name for species like humans. Asterisk fodder, asterisk, that was the official military designation assigned to young, fragile civilizations that stumbled onto the galactic stage before they were ready. The Zarthok Dominion, an empire spanning 500 star systems, had seen it a dozen times before. Some poor, underdeveloped race discovered FTL travel, waved their tiny little flags, and within a century, they were either subjugated or extinct. The galactic community had already placed their bets on humanity's fate, and the odds weren't great. Humans were small, squishy. Their homeworld wasn't particularly noteworthy, aside from having an appalling number of creatures with far too many teeth. Their technology was primitive, their ships looked like they'd been built in a scrapyard, and their biology lacked the enhancements common in advanced species. No exoskeletons, no redundant organs, no natural armor. The only remarkable thing about them, as far as the galaxy was concerned, was their bizarre sense of humor, which, disturbingly, they often deployed in life-or-death situations. So, when the Zarthok announced their invasion of human space, the news was met with the same level of interest as a mild weather report. The Dominion would wipe out a few colonies, set up some mining operations, and in a few decades, humans would either be slaves or a footnote in some bureaucratic ledger. Business as usual. Except, of course, that's not what happened. It started on the human colony of Carthage, a modest little planet with breathable air, decent gravity, and a military outpost that, by all reasonable standards, should have fallen within the first day of the invasion. The Zarthok fleet arrived in full force, deploying overwhelming firepower, and issued the standard surrender broadcast, complete with ominous subharmonic frequencies designed to trigger fear responses in lesser beings. The humans responded by playing an old Earth song called Never Gonna Give You Up across all channels. Confused, the Zarthok commander ordered his fleet to commence orbital bombardment. Missiles screamed toward the colony's surface, only to be intercepted by an infuriatingly well-coordinated missile defense system that should not have been this effective. Ground troops were deployed. They expected cowering civilians and desperate last stands. Instead, they encountered booby traps, explosive-laden farm equipment, vehicles rigged to detonate when tampered with, even something called a duct-tape grenade that, frankly, the Zarthok scientists were still trying to understand. Infantry squads advanced cautiously, only to be ambushed by humans who appeared to be having entirely too much fun. The enemy wasn't just fighting. They were playing, and at the center of it all was a child. Alex Carter was 8 years old. He was not, by any conventional standard, a military genius. He had not been trained in strategy, nor was he the result of some classified experiment. He was, at his core, a very bored child whose parents happened to be stationed on a war-torn colony world. And like all children, he had a way of seeing things that adults did not. For instance, when his father, Colonel Carter, lamented over breakfast that the Zarthok's rigid formations made them nearly invulnerable to conventional human tactics, Alex, between bites of cereal, asked, "What if you just made them think they were being attacked from the wrong side?" This led to a series of conversations that should not, under any reasonable circumstances, have been taken seriously. Yet, within days, those conversations became strategies. The Zarthok had no concept of misdirection. Their military doctrine revolved around brute force and disciplined formations. To them, deception was a sign of weakness. They moved in predictable, calculated patterns. Patterns that Alex, with all the cunning of a child who had spent way too much time playing strategy games, recognized instantly. He suggested painting outdated ships to look like advanced war cruisers, tricking enemy scanners. He proposed using radio broadcasts to play conflicting distress signals, making the enemy chase ghosts. He even, much to the horror of the command staff, suggested rerouting civilian transport vessels to mimic military formations, because, as he put it, they're not expecting the school bus to be full of missiles. The worst part? It worked. The Zarthok, unaccustomed to fighting an enemy that cheated, began making mistakes. They hesitated. They second-guessed their scans. A dreadnought wasted an entire payload on a holographic decoy. An entire regiment was sent to intercept what they thought was a fleeing command post, only to discover it was a pre-recorded message on a loop broadcast from a cargo drone filled with explosives. Alex didn't see himself as a war mastermind. He was just thinking about the problem like he would a game. His strategies weren't built on years of military doctrine, but on a simple truth. People, aliens included, tend to follow patterns. And if you could break those patterns, you could break them. One day, after yet another successful ambush that left the enemy scrambling, a frustrated human officer asked Alex how he came up with his ideas. Alex grinned. "I just keep thinking, if I were playing against me, what would make me quit?" Word of the child strategist spread, first through whispers, then through outright panic among the Zarthok ranks. The Dominion's high command, still unwilling to believe that an infant was somehow responsible for their humiliations, began scouring human databases for answers. They came across something horrifying: the concept of game theory. Humans have been studying the art of competition for centuries, refining it in everything from ancient board games to AI-driven war simulations. Worse, they enjoyed it. War, to the Zarthok, was an unpleasant necessity. To humans, it was just another puzzle to solve, one they had been practicing since childhood. The galaxy had always dismissed humanity as weak, but they had made a fatal miscalculation. Strength wasn't just about firepower or biology. Strength was the ability to adapt, to learn, to cheat. For the first time in history, the Zarthok Dominion, conquerors of 100 worlds, hesitated. Because if this was what human children were capable of, what were the adults hiding? The Zarthok Dominion was used to fighting wars the proper way. Vast fleets clashing in the void, soldiers marching in rigid formations, victory achieved through overwhelming strength. What they were not used to was being humiliated by what their analysts had initially described as a species of soft-bodied, oxygen-dependent primitives with an unseemly fondness for fermented beverages. The war should have been over in days. Instead, it was dragging into months. Humanity, against all probability, was winning. And the reason, disturbingly, seemed to be an 8-year-old child with an alarming talent for making the Zarthok look like idiots. High Command had already issued multiple memos strictly forbidding officers from uttering the phrase, "The human child is in our transmissions," but it didn't stop them from suspecting it. The speed at which the humans adapted was unnatural. Strategies that should have worked were rendered useless almost instantly. Fleet maneuvers that had dominated for centuries were suddenly liabilities. A Zarthok admiral, upon reviewing yet another catastrophic defeat, was heard muttering, "They know what we're going to do before we know what we're going to do." He wasn't wrong. Alex Carter wasn't just coming up with strategies. He was learning the enemy, their habits, their formations, their insecurities. He'd become fascinated with Zarthok battle psychology, specifically the part where they had no concept of psychological warfare. Humans, on the other hand, they had been perfecting the fine art of getting into their opponents' heads since forever. So, naturally, Alex decided to weaponize it. When the Zarthok fleet moved to blockade a human supply route, they discovered that the humans had already evacuated, but left behind several thousand tons of empty ammunition crates. For 3 days, the Dominion's best analysts agonized over the meaning of this. Were the humans signaling an alliance with an unknown power? Was this an intimidation tactic? Had the crates been booby-trapped? No. The crates were just crates, completely harmless. The Zarthok spent weeks second-guessing every strategic decision after that. It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare, though Alex insisted that wasn't the intent. "It's not warfare," he explained to a bewildered human officer. "It's just really funny." And then there was the Ghost Fleet incident. A Zarthok strike force encountered what they thought was a massive human fleet, looming in the darkness of space, positioned perfectly to ambush them. After a frantic retreat and a request for reinforcements, they learned the horrifying truth. The fleet was an elaborate trick involving old satellites, bits of debris, and a bunch of civilian ships with reflective paint. For a species that prided itself on discipline and logic, the idea that humans were deliberately messing with them for fun was too much to handle. The fear spread. Zarthok commanders who had once dismissed humanity as unworthy now saw them as something worse. Unpredictable star. Other alien species, once content to watch humanity's destruction as a form of passive entertainment, began reconsidering their bets. The only thing more dangerous than a powerful enemy was one that enjoyed fighting. Alex's parents, meanwhile, were in the unique and deeply unsettling position of raising a child whose bedtime routine now included designing military counteroffensives. Colonel Carter had once found his son drawing a battle plan on the back of a cereal box and decided not to ask questions. His mother, a scientist by trade, had tried explaining that war was a terrible, tragic thing. Alex had nodded solemnly, agreed completely, and then promptly devised a strategy to make enemy ships accidentally shoot each other. Things escalated when the Dominion launched a last-ditch attempt to retake control of the war. The Zarthok Grand Strategist, an old and highly decorated warlord named Zalvorn, had finally acknowledged that brute force alone wouldn't work. He ordered his forces to mimic human unpredictability. The results were disastrous. A species that had spent millennia perfecting regimented warfare simply could not function in chaos. Zarthok captains, unaccustomed to breaking protocol, became paralyzed with indecision. Some panicked. Others attempted strategies so bizarre and self-destructive that their own troops started questioning reality. One fleet commander, in a desperate bid to confuse the humans, ordered his ships to fly in random spirals. He was immediately fired. Human analysts, watching from intercepted transmissions, could only conclude one thing. The Zarthok were trying to be stupid on purpose. You can't just choose to be unpredictable, Alex explained patiently, while building a small model of a Zarthok battleship out of snack wrappers. It has to come naturally. They're thinking too hard about not thinking too hard. That doesn't make any sense, one of the officers replied. Exactly. By the time the Zarthok realized their mistake, it was too late. Humanity had stopped playing defense. They were winning. The final straw came when Alex proposed his boldest strategy yet. Instead of fighting the Zarthok head-on, humanity would convince them that their own war gods had turned against them. It was a ridiculous, impossible idea. And it worked. The Zarthok, for all their logic and discipline, had deeply ingrained spiritual beliefs. They believed in the unshakable might of the Dominion, the inevitability of their conquests. So what happened when, through carefully manipulated broadcasts, their ships started receiving distress signals from fleets they knew had already been destroyed? What happened when their own AI systems began whispering warnings in distorted Zarthok dialects? What happened when a Dominion warship's entire command crew received, simultaneously, a vision of their own defeat? A vision expertly fabricated using stolen Zarthok mythological imagery and advanced human holographics. What happened was panic. The Zarthok broke. Not all at once, but in slow, unraveling waves. Commanders hesitated. Fleets retreated. Entire battalions surrendered rather than face whatever eldritch trickery the humans had unleashed. The war, which had started as a joke to the galactic community, was no longer funny. The galaxy had always assumed that humanity's greatest strength was resilience, or maybe their reckless courage. They were wrong. It was their creativity, and if this was how they fought wars, what else were they capable of? The Zarthok High Command did not call it a surrender. That would have been too humiliating. Instead, they referred to it as a tactical disengagement, a phrase that, in Zarthok military doctrine, meant retreat while attempting to look dignified. It was not particularly effective, especially when entire fleets were abandoning their posts mid-battle, and one particularly traumatized warlord was found barricading himself in his personal quarters, frantically scratching out calculations to prove that the humans should have lost. They hadn't. Across the galaxy, the unthinkable had happened. Humanity, the so-called fodder species, had rewritten the rules of war. The Zarthok Dominion, an empire that had stood undefeated for millennia, had been bested, not by superior firepower, not by biological advantage, but by sheer, unrelenting human ingenuity. The diplomatic fallout was immediate. The Galactic Council, which had initially treated the war as an amusing sideshow, suddenly found itself in crisis mode. Alliances had been formed under the assumption that the Dominion would always be the dominant military power. That assumption had just been violently corrected. And while the council members had no particular love for the Zarthok, they had an even deeper fear now. If humans, soft, breakable, short-lived humans, could outmaneuver the most disciplined war machine in history, what else were they capable of? The terrifying part was the humans themselves didn't seem all that bothered. They weren't demanding tribute. They weren't carving out a new empire. If anything, they were treating the whole thing as deeply amusing. When a Zarthok ambassador reluctantly offered peace talks, he was greeted by a human diplomat who had the audacity to open negotiations with. Well, that was fun. Want to do it again sometime? There was something wrong with these creatures. The war had officially ended, but its consequences would ripple through the galaxy for generations. Other alien species, long accustomed to dismissing humanity, were now paying very close attention. Some sought alliances, desperate to avoid ending up on the wrong side of human unpredictability. Others quietly initiated research programs to study human behavior, attempting to understand how an entire species could function like a live grenade with a faulty pin. The Zarthok, meanwhile, were experiencing an existential crisis. Their military academies were in shambles, their strategies rendered obsolete overnight. Soldiers who had once prided themselves on their discipline were now terrified of human opponents, whispering rumors of the trickster child, the shadow of Carthage, the terror of the laughing ones. The idea that they had been outmaneuvered by a child was a truth too awful to acknowledge, so it quickly mutated into legend. Alex Carter, of course, remained blissfully unaware of his newfound status as a galactic cryptid. As far as he was concerned, things had gone pretty well. His parents were still trying to figure out if they should be proud or deeply concerned. His mother had already started mentally drafting a research paper titled The Weaponization of Play, an examination of child cognitive patterns in tactical environments. His father had simply decided that as long as Alex was using his powers for Earth and not, say, figuring out how to take over the Galactic Council by accident, things were probably fine. For his part, Alex was just happy the war was over. Not that he hadn't enjoyed it. He had, in fact, enjoyed it a lot. But now he could finally get back to more important things, like convincing his parents to get him a dog. Unfortunately, fate had other plans. It started with the first alien emissary, a delegation from the Zarthok, a species renowned for their mathematical brilliance, arrived on Earth under the pretense of establishing diplomatic relations. In reality, they had a much simpler goal. They wanted to meet the human child who had broken the Zarthok war machine over his knee like an old toy. They found him in his living room, building a model spaceship out of household junk. The Zarthok expected a prodigy, a cold and calculating mind refined through years of training. What they got was a kid who excitedly asked if they wanted to play a game and then proceeded to utterly destroy them in a simple strategy match within 10 minutes. The delegation left Earth in a state of existential dread. Then came the spies. Various galactic powers, still unsure how humans had done it, attempted to infiltrate human military institutions, looking for the hidden secret to their success. They uncovered terrifying knowledge, like humans have no standardized battle doctrine, they just make it up as they go, and a significant percentage of human strategy seems to rely on a concept known as winging it. One spy, upon discovering that humanity actively trained their young in deception and strategy through a thing called hide-and-seek, suffered what could only be described as a minor nervous breakdown. Then came the offers. One particularly desperate alien empire, still rattled by humanity's victory, made an official request. They wanted to hire human consultants to train their armies. Earth politely declined. The offer was revised. Instead of hiring an entire team, they wanted one human. Just one. Specifically, Alex Carter. This was met with a firm response from his mother, who informed the ambassadors that under no circumstances was she letting her 8-year-old son get recruited by interstellar warlords. The ambassadors, deeply confused by the concept of parental authority, requested clarification. But he won the war. He also refuses to eat vegetables unless they're shaped like dinosaurs, his mother replied. You really want him leading your army? The ambassadors held an emergency meeting. They withdrew the request. Despite humanity's insistence that they were not interested in galactic domination, the rumors continued. The mere idea of what humans were capable of had permanently altered interstellar politics. The Zarthok Dominion, once feared, was now cautious. The Galactic Council, once dismissive, now treated human diplomats with a level of respect usually reserved for apex predators. And Alex? He was 8 years old. He didn't care about diplomacy or politics or the fact that an entire empire now had war doctrines named after him. He was too busy trying to finish his latest project, a board game he was designing, based loosely on the war. When asked what it was called, he grinned and held up the cover. It read, "Oops, all war crimes." His parents confiscated it immediately. But deep in the cold void of space, warlords and kings and admirals from 100 worlds were losing sleep over a single, terrifying truth. The humans had been underestimated once. It would not happen again,